Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. You're watching another edition of Break the Fake, where we debunk fake news and combat false narratives. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and let's get rolling. Yulia Navalnaya, widow of Alexei Navalny and one of the most visible public figures of the Russian democratic opposition abroad, has sparked debate over Europe's new visa rules for Russian citizens. After the European Commission announced an end to multiple entry Schengen visa for Russians, many Europeans reacted with a quiet, it's about time. Navalnaya, however, reacted with frustration and turned the change into a point of personal and political contention. Why are all Russians being punished? Is this collective responsibility? Punish Putin, not us, she said, as if we were about a parking fine, not a country launching missiles at its neighbors every day. Navalnaya added that these restrictions, quote, won't stop saboteurs. Maybe, but the people who abuse visas are the ones mixing tourism, business trips, and covert tasks, the very gray zone the EU is trying to close.
Это как так? Борьбу с Путиным и с его агрессией я всецело поддерживаю, двумя руками за. Но при чем тут все россияне? Это что, опять разговор про коллективную ответственность? Хотите Путина наказывать? Наказывайте. Говорят, это для борьбы с гибридной агрессией. Путин ведет необъявленную войну с Европой. Дроны мешают работе аэропортов. Надо что-то делать. Вот мы придумали такую меру. Надо что-то делать. Давайте запретим россиянам приезжать в Европу по одной и той же визе больше, чем один раз. И снова у меня вопрос, а как эта мера поможет? Своих диверсантов Путин как засылал, так и будет засылать. Они и одноразовую визу получат, или по дипломатическому паспорту въедут, или по паспорту третьей страны. Никаких проблем. Вы пытаетесь бороться с проблемой или изображать борьбу. Если Путин ведет войну, то надо обороняться и отвечать. Полиция должна работать, искать тех, кто все это устраивает, кто за это платит, отслеживать цепочки исполнителей, предотвращать и наказывать, а не подменять эту работу популистскими решениями, которые и не решения вовсе, потому что никаким изменениям, увы, не приведут. Нельзя говорить, что надо перестать пускать в Европу обычных россиян и одновременно приветствовать Матвиенко и Слуцкого, Толстого и Гергиева. Вы не можете одной рукой торговать с Путиным, а другой с ним воевать. Такая политика двойных стандартов не делает вас сильнее, а значит, играет на руку Путину.
So, what did the EU actually adopt? Well, on November 7th, the European Commission approved stricter visa rules for Russians. No more multi-entry Schengen visas. Each trip now requires a fresh application. Exceptions remain for independent journalists, human rights offenders, and others at risk. The logic is simple. Security. Europe is no longer pretending it's still 2010. Now, Navalnaya calls this, quote, the wrong response. But what alternative does the Russian opposition offer? Resistance, protests, an organized anti-war front? Hardly. Over the past few years, Yulia Navalnaya has collected more awards than political results. Trophies, microphones, red carpets, all the symbols of relevance minus actual substance. While Europe tightens policy to protect itself, much of the Russian opposition seems to specialize in taking offense. As for collective responsibility, it is an odd phrase coming from a society where 99% allegedly support the president and hundreds of thousands of volunteers for his war. When a country tolerates aggression for years, consequences aren't punishment, they're just cause and effect. Navalnaya's worried about visa queues, Europe is worried about drones. Ukraine buries another child. Against that reality, complaints about inconvenience sound tone deaf. Russians want privileges without responsibility, Ukrainians just want to live. And if the EU's decision moves even slightly towards that goal, it's not a tragedy, it's overdue. Russia, which spent decades bragging about being one of the world's top 3 arms exporters, is now left with nothing but memory of that industry. In Moscow's propaganda, the country is still a global weapons giant. In reality, it has become a former giant that can't keep up with its own slogans.
Практически в половину уменьшился. Но у нас сегодня портфель заказов, это подписанные и уже утвержденные контракты, более 60 миллиардов долларов. Это люди, то есть наши партнеры, они говорят, мы готовы подождать, это отложенный спрос, и по мере нашей возможности мы будем им поставлять эту технику. Я вас уверяю, что через 2-3 года мы опять поднимемся до второго уровня. У нас уровень производства вырос в разы, а то и в десятки раз. Потому что объемы у нас большие, выросли. Просто мы в основном сейчас нашей армии отправляем. Но сейчас мы еще увеличиваем мощности с тем, чтобы обеспечить в том числе и наших партнеров.
So, Sergei Chemezov, the head of Rostec, has finally said the quiet part out loud. Russia's arms exports have been cut in half since 2022. Before the invasion of Ukraine, the Kremlin earned around $14 billion a year from weapons sales. In 2024, it earned just $1 billion, a collapse of 92% compared to 2021. Over the last 5 years, exports have dropped 64%, and Russia's share of the global arms market has fallen from 21% to 7.8%. Sanctions, isolation, and a war that devours everything have pushed the military-industrial complex to produce almost exclusively for the Russian army. And the countries that once lined up to buy Russian tanks are now watching how those tanks perform in Ukraine and quietly stepping away. Effective and reliable is not a description they feel comfortable using anymore. And this isn't just a financial problem, it's a geopolitical one. A state that built part of its global influence on arms exports now has to count rubles and look for customers in a few places sanctions haven't touched. Now, those markets are small and worse, shrinking. What used to be a showcase of Russian power has become a reminder of Russian decline. The money is disappearing, the influence is evaporating, and Russia's reputation has sunk lower than its own propaganda. Russia hasn't just lost the market, it's lost one of the last things that made it look strong. So, Belarus has announced a breakthrough in the world of fashion. Or at least that's what state television insists. The state's own enterprise, Galantea in Minsk, has released its own version of the Birkin bag. And instead of $9,000, this one costs around $90. In a country that can't fix its economy, has apparently decided to fix the luxury market.
Приветствую всех модниц из города Минска. Сейчас я вам покажу такое, что вы точно не ожидаете. Фирма Галантей белорусская начала производить ту самую желанную сумку, которую хотят все. Да-да-да-да. Натуральная кожа. Так, конечно, не палладий, не это. Стоит она 339 белорусских рублей. Сейчас мы ее откроем вместе с вами, посмотрим, что там внутри. Итак, показываю вам, как она выглядит внутри. Посмотрите на это качество. Конечно, шовчики тут подкачали кое-где. Сзади этот самый замочек. Сейчас я подойду к зеркалу, я вам покажу, как это будет выглядеть. Вот так она будет выглядеть.
Now let's put things in perspective. The original Birkin is a status object that costs as much as a halfway decent car and is handed out only to those who pass an invisible "Are you wealthy enough?" filter. But anyone can buy the Belarusian version with plenty of colors to choose from, and no consultant is going to size you up first. It's less of a luxury revolution and more of a reminder that even symbols of inequality can't be copied if a factory has spare leather and no oversight. Some critics joke that Hermes now has competition from a state enterprise that was sewing stool covers just last season. It's funny and depressing how quickly the line between aspiration and parody disappears. Now, the contrast here is almost too neat. The Birkin has always stood for excess, a bag you're expected to chase, justify, and practically audition for. The Belarusian version stands for the opposite, a system where even luxury is stripped down, state-issued, and meant to look impressive mainly on paper. One is a symbol of overconsumption, and the other is a symbol of substitution. And in today's Belarus, that's a real story. Not fashion, but a government trying to imitate a world it has long isolated itself from. The Birkin is built on prestige, The Galantea copy is built on necessity. And between those two extremes lies a country pretending that a handbag can distract from everything else. And with that, we conclude this edition of Break the Fake. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.